model what, success on your own terms looks like, and model what a culture that celebrates humanity and well-being and soul looks like.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutvik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I'm so excited that I had the opportunity to sit down with Shelley Paxton. Think Brene Brown meets Biker Babe with a dash of Liz Gilbert. She was a former chief marketing officer of Harley Davidson and found herself at the top of the proverbial mountain feeling success empty instead of successful. I can't wait for you to listen in and hear about her Soulbbatical journey. Along the way, I'm certain you'll learn a thing or two. Oh my gosh, Shelley, thank you so much for being here. I just am in awe that you would say yes to me.
Oh my God, are you kidding? I'm a hell yes.
I love it. I love it. So I just want to start out knowing a little bit more about you, right? You wrote this book, you're on these big stages, you're doing these things that are just impacting people at, in their soul. But tell us a little bit about how you got there first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been quite the journey over the past 6.5 years. To give everybody a sense for where I came from, I had a pretty incredible 26-year career in the advertising and marketing world. And at the proverbial, top of the mountain, I was chief marketing officer of Harley Davidson, the iconic global brand people tattoo on their bodies. What an honor to steward a badass brand like Harley Davidson. And as I was there, I was starting to have this feeling and actually had a nightmare that was making this feeling and this pain very real. How could I have gotten to this place, which is, presumably my dream and my dream job. And I've been working so hard to get to this place. And yet I feel empty inside. And I felt really guilty for asking the question, is this all there is? Right? I just kind of feel exhausted and burned out, and I'm not taking good care of myself. And I was asking all those questions, and then I really truly believe that the universe and my soul conspired to wake me up. So keep in mind, this is years before the global pandemic that we've all just been through. But I imagine what a lot of people experienced during the pandemic, your foundation getting shook. And this event that crystallizes what matters most to you. That's what was happening to me back in 2015, 2016, as I'm this senior executive at Harley Davidson. And I'm starting to have this nightmare nearly every night of the week that is waking me up. It was almost like clockwork. I was basically being taken through this maze that was sort of like some version of the apartment that I lived in at the time. But it got spookier and spookier until I was in this dark room, and all I could see across the room was an outline of a little utility closet that somebody had left the light on. And I was like, what? I don't even know what this room is. And then there's this closet that I've never seen before and the light's on. Literally, I'm walking through this every night. I cross over and I open the door to this closet and I come face to face with a neglected skeletal near-death dog. And for any dog lovers like me, this will, trigger warning, this will rip your heart out. I see this dog, I look down, and it was my dog. So for 9 years, I had my fur baby, my precious blind pug, Mocha. And he had died 6 years prior to me having this nightmare. But in the nightmare, he's basically alive in this closet and dying a very slow, painful death because I have forgotten about him. And I pick him up, I scoop him up, I'm kissing him, I'm promising I'll never leave him again, I'm telling him how much I love him, and boom, just like that, I wake up.
Whoa. Every single night, the same dream.
Almost every night. It was like at least 5 nights a week, exactly like that. And every time I wake up, I'm drenched in sweat and tears. I am like, oh my God, I'm a monster. My dog has been alive this entire time, and I have neglected him, and I'm not taking care of him. And how could I not even know that he was in this closet? And I didn't get it at the time. And I think it says a lot. Like, I was so busy. I was purposefully busy, I should say, right? I was trying to outrun all of these thoughts and feelings and all of this fear that was coming up around like, what is going on? And I was exhausted. I was trying to drink myself to sleep to like incapacitate this nightmare. And finally, about 3 or 4 months into having this nightmare, like I said, it was my final year at Harley. About 3 to 4 months into this, I was like, I need help. I'm going to lose my mind, or I'm just going to completely collapse from exhaustion.
What was something that like made you come to your senses about that, right? Like, what was there a moment you can put your finger on? Was there a conversation you had, or was it just like you were at a breaking point of just, I can't open my eyes anymore?
Yeah, it was the latter. I was at a breaking point. And, the thing that I talk about in my book and in a lot of my work is like, I am now, I now see so clearly that I didn't really have role models who told me it's okay to ask for help. I was trying to be like that strong woman, put on the armor, all the things. And, like I now understand the power of vulnerability and the power of showing your humanity and your leadership and the power of asking for support when we need it. It's the reason why community around us is so important. And I didn't understand all of those things so deeply back then. So that's why I say, like, I truly, for me at the time, it was that I just got to a breaking point where I was like, I might not be alive to tell this story because I'm now so exhausted. I'm running on fumes. I am not showing up, powerfully for myself or anybody else, in my work, for my team, for anybody in my life. And so I went to see a doctor, and he helped me. He was like, okay, we need to slow you down, right? So he was the very first person who introduced me to meditation. And I am not here to tell the world that meditation solves everything and that it, cured me or whatever. Here's what really helped me. He's the first person that helped me realize that whether you do meditation, any form of it, or whether you simply find ways in your life to slow down.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say that. There was like a little girl making bracelets. This was a couple years ago, and she'd put any word on it. And the word I put on mine was pause. And I should wear it every single day because I have a hard time with pausing in general in life because there's guilt that comes along with that, right? Like I should be doing something. You like should yourself to death because you're feeling like something is going unattended to if you just sit for a minute.
It's so true. Well, so I learned the pause bracelet lesson in the midst of having this epic nightmare. And so this doctor helped me understand that if I did nothing else than just sit still and listen deeply, and as I did that, and listen, it was so hard. Like I was doing my grocery lists and my to-do lists in my head. And I was like,
it's probably a little scary too, right? You're like, what's going to pop up in my head?
Well, that's exactly what it is. That's why so many of us, like we're conditioned to wear busyness as a badge of honor, right? This is something I talk about in my work all the time. And I was somebody who proudly wore that badge of honor. The 2 words that I eliminated from my vocabulary as I've been on this, what I call Soulbbatical journey, which we'll talk about, were crazy busy. Because I realized in reflecting that I would say that to people all the time. They'd be like, Shelley, how are you? Or when can we get together for lunch or whatever? And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so crazy busy. Like, let me get back to you. And I'm like embarrassed that I said it so often. I'm like, it's a miracle that people would even talk to me anymore and didn't just like close me off, right? So I would say like, for anybody listening right now who's like, yeah, here's the thing, like if it feels hard to take 10 minutes, here's what that same doctor said to me when I was like pushing back. I'm like, oh my God, but I'm exhausted and I don't have the time and this and that. I had all the excuses in the book for just not sitting quietly. And he said, listen, a wise person once said to me, if you can't take 10 minutes, you probably need 3 hours. And I was like, like my head exploded. And I was like,
you're like, well, I really don't have that. So what does that mean?
Yeah. And now I really understand that, right? Like we tell ourselves all kinds of stories. We'll happily sit and binge watch Netflix for 2 hours, but we tell ourselves that we don't have 10 minutes to get quiet and to be with ourselves and to reflect. And your point is exactly right. It's often because we're really, really scared of what might come up.
Yeah. So what did that journey look like for you when you started to do how did you start and what did it feel like?
Well, scary, super scary, really uncomfortable. Honestly, it felt almost impossible in the beginning because it was a muscle I hadn't built yet. And, I was like, I think I was afraid that everything I was pretending not to know would come to the surface and I'd have to deal with it. And the truth is that will happen, right? I mean, my favorite question to myself and anybody around me, whether it's coaching clients in a talk, a workshop, whatever, I will say, what are you pretending not to know? Because we know. It's the reason why we ask everybody around us for advice, because we want somebody else to tell us the thing.
Sure. Or validate something else, right?
Totally. Yeah. Oh, no, it's that person. It's that person. It's not that I don't really want to be doing what I'm doing. It's just that I have an evil boss or I have whatever. And listen, I'm not downplaying. Like, I'm sure there always are external circumstances, but how we choose to face those or saying we are trapped in a job or trapped in a situation, it's more often than not, for me, I mean, I'll speak from personal experience that I've seen this repeated in people around me. I was terrified because my entire identity was wrapped up in being this badass corporate executive who had worked for some of those iconic brands in the world, who's now running, this sexy global brand and reached the C-suite level. I had no clue who I was without all of that. And that is really, really challenging. So when you ask me, how did that feel? Like, of course I'm terrified because I'm like, but I also knew that something had to give and something had to change. And I think so often, I don't have it in front of me. I will try to offer up this quote as intact as possible. But one of my favorite quotes that I cite frequently is an Anais Nin quote, which may sound odd in kind of a leadership context, but it describes my experience and so many others. It's like the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk to blossom. It rocked my world.
Sure. Like the scales start to tip in a different direction.
Totally. And I realized I'm like, that's it. Like me remaining and continuing to tell myself the story that I'm stuck here, that I have golden handcuffs, that this is the only, that this is my only identity forever. All of those stories that we tell ourselves, I realized like it was simply too painful to keep living in that narrative. And that I was going to do everything possible to start creating a new one, however terrifying that felt. And believe me, it was terrifying. And when ultimately, to like bring this story forward a little bit more, I made the decision that I was going to leave Harley. So I'm, at the peak of my career, I was then 46 years old, which is a terrifying time to leave anything because you're like, what's going to happen to me? And if it doesn't work out, is anybody ever going to take me back anywhere? Right? Like, I get it. Ageism is a real thing. And, so these fears are all super, super valid. It's just that, I don't know. At some point, like, when are your fears just going to keep you in that pain point forever? And when are you going to be ready to go, no, you know what? I'm going to take the chance on, I called it investing in the possibility of my future self. And that I was willing to take a year of my life, which is what I chose to do. You don't have to do that. But I was willing to put aside a little bit of money. I spent 6 months at Harley. I didn't tell them until the very end, but I was architecting the new organization. I was putting in place successors. I wanted to leave this awesome brand in amazing shape. I loved my team. I wanted to leave my team in a good place with awesome support and the best possible chance for success. And I knew I had to give myself this time to reconnect with my soul, because to connect the dots between the nightmare and what I'm saying right now, clearly what I realized, and this happened through meditation and slowing down, I realized that what I was seeing, like Mocha, my precious little fur baby, was a proxy for my soul. And my soul was neglected and malnourished and longing for attention. And so that was my experience. Your experience, others' experience might not be the same, but that's what woke me up to going, wow, I'm living my dad's dream. I'm not even living my own truth. And what is my truth? I didn't know.
I was going to ask you that, like, so you have to take this year-long Soulbbatical, right? But how did you start to uncover what your zone of genius and your dreams were, and what you were like put on this planet for, right? And like living your best and fullest life. Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, well, the one thing I will say is you could do some version of this without leaving your job too. You could do some version of this where you say, hey, I want to take a month-long sabbatical or Soulbbatical, right? There are different flavors of this that might feel right for people. And for me, it was putting one foot in front of the other. I gave myself permission to be in the unknown, which was so scary. So scary. It's like the first time in my life that I wasn't like, I'd always gone from amazing job to amazing job, and people believing in me and supporting me and recruiting me to these incredible positions. And so for the first time in my life, I was on my own. The thing that my entire identity was tethered to is now gone. And, some days I was in the fetal position, and it's going to happen, right? Like, some days I would wake up and go, oh my God, why doesn't everybody do this? And then some days I'd wake up and I was like, I am literally the dumbest person in the world. Like, what have I done? And everything in between. So the how, and I talk about a lot, specifically a lot of what I did in the book and in my work, but to give you a flavor, I started traveling because I thought, for me, my entry point to better knowing and connecting with myself was to know and reconnect with my passions. That was a starting point. And it's still, I think, really powerful advice. And it's advice I give often, because I said, whatever this looks like for you, I think we lose touch with the things we love and what lights us up, right? So for me, I was like, great, what is that? Well, it's writing. I'd always loved writing and I'd always dreamed of writing a book, but I had literally stopped writing anything but like PowerPoint slides for business presentations. I wasn't even writing articles as a thought leader. Like I just like veered so far off the path. So I was like, I want to get back to writing, just writing, whatever that looks like, right? Is it writing an essay? Is it writing an article? Is it blogging about this journey and this experience? I didn't know what it was going to look like. The other thing for me was photography. I've always loved photography. And I'm like, God, I have all these like amazing cameras sitting around here. And I'm like, why don't I, so I want to get back into that, because that's all about perspective and you see things in a different light and all of it. And then the third thing was travel, like where does my soul feel called to go? Because listen, I'm so blessed. I have traveled to like 66 plus countries. I've lived all over the world. I've worked all over the world. And what I realize is so much of it over those decades of my career was, unless I lived somewhere, like I lived in Istanbul, Turkey for 4 years early on in my career. I lived briefly in Shanghai, China. But I was like, I kind of lost touch with like just traveling because my soul feels called to go somewhere. And then maybe there is a lesson in there for me about, my identity or some breadcrumb that's going to lead me to the next thing. And I intentionally say breadcrumb because this is what I see now in hindsight is the more I was okay with kind of sitting in the not knowing and being in that space of uncertainty, however scary it felt. And yes, it felt very scary even today. I mean, like, when we're doing big stuff, it's going to feel scary. So letting myself be in that and trusting that if I would just take little steps in the direction of what was lighting me up, that new like doors and little breadcrumbs would be there for me to follow. And if they weren't, and I suddenly was like, I don't like any of this, then I could course correct, right? It's like nothing's permanent. This isn't like the Holy Grail written in, stone.
It's like you build this thing up in your head. Like in the absence of information, you create a story, right? That's like how we're wired and in everything in life, in friendships and any relationship and any story that we hear in the news, whatever, right? Absence of information, we create these stories. I can't imagine like the stories that you probably built up in your head. I find myself doing the same thing. And then before we know it, we've like stopped before we've even started. And you're like, what the heck? Like my husband will say to me, you don't have to do that. You get to do that. And like, how cool is that, right? Like you got to do that.
Yeah. Well, and also let's go back to something you said earlier, because this is a key point. Like when I talk about the roadmap, like kind of, some things that became apparent to me that are a roadmap to rewriting your own script of success, right? Because we're so often, let's go back to, two things that you said. One is, we narrate this script in our head based on a lot of conditioning, based on scripts we're handed from society or our parents or others. And we have the opportunity to say, I'm no longer signing up for that generation's old, societal definition of success that's leaving me exhausted and burned out and unfulfilled, right? And I said this in my TEDx talk, like the number one regret of the dying. So there's a palliative care nurse. She's Australian and she's the author of a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. I don't know if you've heard of this book. The number one regret of the dying is I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Every time I hear that, like it just gives me the chills because that's like this societal definition of success has so much of us on this hamster wheel or treadmill or whatever metaphor you want to use for it and doing it on someone else's terms. And a big piece of that is what I call the shackles of should. And you said the shoulds earlier, right? We do. We should all over ourselves. And one of the things I realized I was doing, and it became kind of the meat of the middle of my book, was I talked about my big shoulds that we're driving. And we get so attached to these stories that they become like reality and they become like permanent in our heads. And the reality is we can break free from them, right? So, I had a big one around like I should make personal sacrifices for work because otherwise they're going to discover that I'm a fraud.
Like the imposter syndrome, right? And I think that's in a lot of people's heads that they don't ever speak it out because it feels weird to say it. And then it's like, well, if I say it, then I'll for sure get found out.
Yeah. Completely. And so a big part of our work and, ultimately like I'm not, this is part of the work I ultimately did a little further on down the line. I did a lot of reading. I had a coach. I went on this kind of global journey to spirit lands. I was called to. New Zealand was one of them where I started writing again. And I really explored my identity. Like who am I when you strip away all of this stuff? And I did these really difficult exercises. I even share in the book, like this I am, it's not really a poem, but like my I am statement. When I got down to my core, I'm like, but it's not about those things, right? When you strip away the titles and the accolades and the money and the things and all of it, you remind yourself that you're like a pretty worthy badass, right? We just forget because we attach so much of our value to all of these other things outside of us. And so that's a big part of the work I did, to remind myself of my own inherent worth and value. And so I did the like, I am a trailblazer. I am a badass. I am, whatever. Like I went on and on, right? And so that was one piece of it. And then the other piece of it was around these, like, what are my should stories? Because what you said is so powerful. This idea that it's like, I do this exercise with clients and in workshops, and it's also in the book. You take literally a piece of paper. I was looking to see if I had like an 8x10. Anyway, take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, title the left column Soul Sucks, and title the right column Soul Fuels. And take 5 minutes. Don't pick up your pen or pencil or marker or whatever you're writing with, and just write, like, what are all of the things that are draining you of energy, and just putting this like wet blanket on your life. And just keep doing that until 5 minutes goes off on your phone. Then do soul fuels, which are like, what are those things that are igniting you and giving you energy? And this is people, places, activities, events, things, whatever it is on both sides, and it's not to say that all of the soul sucks in life can go away. Like, yeah, we all have to do taxes. Okay, yeah. I get it.
It's like the 70-30 rule. Like 70% should be soul fuel and 30% is going to suck. That's fine.
And I guarantee you there's stuff on your soul sucks list that can be delegated, that can be deleted altogether. What I think is really interesting is when you step back from both of those lists after you've given yourself that 5 minutes on either side, ask yourself some questions like, which list is longer? What surprises me? What inspires me? Like, what do I want more of? What do I want less of? And especially with the soul sucks, like, and why am I continuing to do some of these things? And when you really dig, more often than not, for myself and everyone I've done this exercise with, there's like guilt, obligation, and people pleasing underneath so many of those things, that when we give ourselves permission to go, that's not really mine to do, or that's better done by somebody else. Or when I do the trade-offs to make space for soul fuels, maybe that's something that, either gets done by someone else, or I outsource it, or whatever it is. But I guarantee.
Or maybe it's even like a tough conversation, right? It's like, are we just avoiding a tough conversation, but in the process of that, just like sucking the life out of us?
And so much of that. That's like the guilt, the obligation, conflict avoidance, right? Like, and I'm not even suggesting, but, having those courageous conversations, even with members of our own family, right? Or members of our, team at work, or maybe it's the leadership team, whatever it is. Like, this applies to every context in our lives. It's like, what are those things where just like, how many times have you said like, fine, I'll just do it? And it's like, what is going on? So that gets at this idea, like, you will reveal, I guarantee you will reveal some of the shoulds that are in the operating system of your life when those soul sucks come up on your list, because you're telling yourself, well, I should do that. I should do that. Instead of really investigating why you're doing it and what story you're telling yourself that's driving that should. And so that's another one. So releasing myself, and I'm not saying this happened overnight, like, oh, I have a magic key, but guess what? We all do actually have a magic key to get out of the prison we've created for ourselves. The door is open. It's our choice. you've got to really dig in and ask those hard questions and understand what's going on and reveal those stories for yourself so that you can go, oh, okay, there's a new narrative I want to create for myself. And that's so much of what I talk about is, okay, great. Let's start writing what that new script is, because we get to do life on our terms. And it's like your husband said, we get to do, like, what do you get to do? What do you want to do? I talk about success as a feeling, not a checklist. I think it's super, super destructive. I mean, that word is bold intentionally for us to, have the success like defined on somebody else's terms and defined as these boxes we check over our lives. Because then you end up like me and you're like, well, wait a second. I ticked all of those boxes and I feel empty. So I'm on this quest to help people get from success empty to success full. And the only way we can do that is to recognize that it gets to be on our terms and it gets to be a feeling, right? So at the end of the day, how will success feel for you?
And I think there's this misnomer too that in my observation of life, right, that you should be happy. Well, I think feeling fulfilled and full has this journey, right? Like you said, and a lot of it, you might not have felt quote unquote happy because it was hard. And it was like, do I really know what the next thing is for me? But it's like the feeling of feeling fulfilled is far greater than the feeling in the moment of feeling happy, right? Because you got to do the hard work to be fulfilled. Sometimes happiness is because you got a big deposit in your bank account, but like that doesn't fulfill you.
Listen, I am a believer that, our own joy, I tend to use the word joy more than happiness. That's a preference, but I believe joy is inside of us and it is what we are choosing. Again, it's part of the narrative. It's part of the mindset. And I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying that shitty things aren't going to happen in life, because shitty things are going to happen in life. Like, here's a great example. And this is not the only example. I was 8 months into this Soulbbatical and I got a phone call that my dad was in brain surgery and was about to die because he had a massive stroke. And I was like, oh my God, if I needed another sign from the universe that like life can't keep looking. This is my dad who I was literally living his dream. He was a wildly successful executive who, started in the marketing realms and then went on to be CEO and chairman and sat on lots of boards and was revered as, this amazing leader by so many people. Now, my dad is still alive. He's lives a very different life. He's very brain damaged. He can't read. He can't write. He can't use a phone. I mean, we have a very different relationship and it's simple and it's beautiful. And he sees things and he sees things that he would have never seen before. He moves through life in a more, slow and intentional way. And it's really beautiful. And I've learned lessons. But when that happened and I spent 5 months with him and my mom on his recovery and moving them down to Florida so they could live the best life possible and all of it, it became so clear to me that I was never going to go back, because that happened to my dad at 71 years of age when he was super fit, still running 25 miles a week on 0 medications, 1% body fat. I mean, there was no way he would have been a candidate for a stroke or frankly anything else at that point. And he had just retired 3 years prior. And it's killing my mom, now we're 5.5 years later. It's killing her because she's like, oh my God, I supported all of this. And I was looking forward to these, halcyon sunset retirement years, and they're gone. And so I really locked into this idea that like we postpone joy in our lives. And I think because of the way we define success so often, it's like, well, when X happens, when Y happens, it's always like attached to this future thing. And I know I'm not saying anything revolutionary. We all know this, but we get to write a script that says, no, I'm going to appreciate like success every single day. What does that look like? Like for me right now, I get the most beautiful notes from people who read my book and tell me about how, some insight or maybe my journey inspired them to do something different in their lives. I'm like, that success for me is now that currency, right? It's that feeling that I impacted one soul today. That's it. It's not how much money I make. It's like, yeah, I mean, yes, of course, I need to keep a roof over my head. And I'm not saying don't make money in life and is a charity project, but I'm also saying those things aren't mutually exclusive. And I'm hoping that more people to choose to live success in the present and say, I get to feel this way, right? Like stop pinning it on those things in the future, those things outside of our control, or, like what does success feel like today?
Yeah. I love that I am statement. I love because that will help define what success is, right? If there's something on that list that you're either not doing or you are doing and aren't proud of, or you know what I mean? There could be things on there too that are not living your best self, I guess. So how do you do this through others, right? So you wrote this book, Soulbbatical. It's like the journey that you had is so awesome. So what is the, how do you impart this on others? What are the like two things people should start doing in order to just start discovering in this journey of like living with passion and purpose and soul?
Yeah, well, I would say number one is do that soul sucks versus soul fuels exercise, right? Like, don't let that pass you by. I say this like with a little bit of a wink and a nod because I was always the person who's like, yeah, I'll do the exercise later. Or if there were like questions and exercises in a book, and I say this in my book, I'm super honest. I was like, P.S. I'm giving you all this. I was the first person to go, yeah, whatever. Like, I'll get to that step later. And I would always breeze through it and I would never go back to it. So, I just want to be honest that when I finally got honest with myself about doing the work, which meant answering the hard questions, which meant, getting honest about the things sucking my soul and why and what the narrative was behind that, getting honest about the shoulds I was shackling myself to in my own life. So start there as one. So that's one thing I think, or maybe two, right? The soul fuels versus the soul sucks. And then as you're understanding those, really like weed the shoulds out of there and then start examining those in your life and thinking about how you want to turn those around into, okay, no more of that. Maybe it's courageous conversations. Maybe it's outsourcing, delegating, deleting that stuff from your life and starting to create the new narrative. The other thing is if we go back to like the very beginning of how do I find 10 minutes to slow down, whether it's to meditate or whatever. Here's one of the things. It's funny. I joked to you that I was writing down something on an orange Post-it note before we started recording. So I have piles and piles. Orange happens to be my favorite color. Pick your favorite color. Does not matter what it is, but I am surrounded by Post-it notes in my favorite color because it makes me smile. And I use these as permission slips. So every day I give myself, like I literally will sit down. Sometimes it's part of like a morning, just getting still routine. But I really sit down and ask myself, like, what do I need to give myself permission to do, to not do, or to feel today in order to show up as my most powerful, brave, badass self? And write as many permission slips as you need, right? And sometimes it might just be like, I will do this before big presentations. I'll say, I give myself permission to have fun. I give myself permission to play because I think too often these things are like serious and weighty and, and then it's like, oh, it just, it's like the audience just feels heavy. And I'm like, no, let's play with this. Let's be interactive. The more fun I'm having, the more people realize that like this can unlock fun in your life. That's going to unlock play. This stuff is deep because it will change your life. And it doesn't mean that there can't be an element of play. So I'll often give myself permission to play. Sometimes I'll give myself permission for a nap, right? Instead of having like a third cup of coffee, which is just like artificially stimulating my body, I'll be like, no, you know what? I'm going to block a half an hour this afternoon. And I'm going to take a power nap. Or sometimes it's like, I overstacked my calendar again and I'm not subscribing. Like I said earlier, I'm not subscribing to Crazy Busy. I am not subscribing to this again. So what needs to be removed? What needs to be rescheduled? Because I don't want to get into that martyr place of like, oh, woe is me, I'm so crazy busy, right? So what permission slips do you want to write so you can create space? Maybe it's permission to take 20 minutes before anybody else in your house wakes up. Maybe write these the night before so that you can sit quietly, light your favorite candle, write yourself a couple more permission slips, really like tune in, because that's the only way we really know the way forward. We all know it's inside of us. Nobody else has the answers.
And then as a leader, right? You were a leader of this huge team when you were working at Harley. So what would you say, knowing what you know now and this journey that you've been on, what is it that leaders can do for their teams or their people as they start to engage in these conversations to help unlock the potential that's inside of them? Because that could be scary too as a leader if you're unlocking something and this high potential person, or they deem high potential, right, walks out the door because they're like you, I'm not fulfilling my passion and purpose in life, and I have to go. What does that look like as a leader to their people?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this happen with others, and it's like, you know what? There's always a chance that's going to happen, right? There is. So I think the first thing I would say is we can't live in fear of it happening, because people are going to make choices and decide that their calling to impact or to do whatever lights their soul up might be somewhere else. It's not going to be 90% of your people. But yeah, are some people going to make that decision? Of course they are. And I think we want good people doing good stuff in this world. I think, how I would answer that question is I'd maybe back up a little bit and say one of the things that I'm super passionate about and talk about all the time is how we as leaders can model more of what this looks like for our people, right? So I would say, even before you get to a place where you're afraid of some of your best people or one or two of your best people leaving, which may happen anyway for reasons outside of your control, I would say, how can you as a leader model what, success on your own terms looks like, and model what a culture that celebrates humanity and well-being and soul looks like. So one example is being really clear about like, okay, you know what? I send and respond to emails within these hours. I'm not available here. Setting super clear boundaries and enabling or empowering your team to do the same. The other one that I'm super passionate about is flipping the time off script. So you don't have to take a year-long Soulbbatical or even a 3-month Soulbbatical or a 1 month. But what drives me crazy is that there's still this element of like bragging rights about not taking vacation, especially here in the US. And I'm like, no, we as leaders get to help, get to shift how we think about this and model what it means to take a long weekend, to not be available in the evenings, to take your entire 2 or 3 weeks of holiday, hopefully more. But I know in some cases that's still where we are in the States in particular. And I want us to be more like what's happening over in Europe and Australia and New Zealand. And let's start with where we are. And where we are is,
even taking the weekend,
right? Taking the weekend.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who just can't disconnect.
And not setting expectations that when I send you an email or text that you have to respond within the hour or 10 minutes or whatever it is. Like, let's start to model what that looks like. Let's model what it looks like to take care of ourselves, to put well-being, like even doing check-ins, right? I mean, I say this, and I'm really conscious that we have to create psychological safety in offices and with teams in order to do some of this. So to be leaders who take responsibility for creating a culture of psychological safety, so we can also check in. I run 3 groups for the chief organization, so senior female executives, and we check in with one word: mentally, how am I doing? Physically, how am I doing? Emotionally, how I'm doing? We do these check-ins. So I get the temperature of the room, like, where are we? What does this group need right now? How can I best serve them, and how can we best support each other? I'd love to see more of that happening in all organizations.
Right. Because if we could remove some of those barriers that are like in our head, we could think about like our best selves showing up, right? Because our best selves aren't even showing up because we have like all these blocks before we can even get there.
Absolutely. And we might not feel safe. And I get that, right? There are a lot of corporate environments in particular that don't feel safe for people right now to show up authentically, to show up, vulnerably, to show up and even have or model these types of things. So I recognize that there are various layers, but I think as a leader, really kind of assessing how can you be a role model for, moving these kinds of things forward, for creating, like our friend Chris Tuff talks about, having different conversations with your people to say, yeah, like explore your passions. Like, what are you passionate about? How can we bring more of that into what you're doing? How can you create some space for that? There's so many ways to play this, but we really need to step up and lead those and model those conversations.
And get to know our people, right? Whether that's the people that work for you, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's the mailman, whether whoever, right? Get to know people. They want to feel connected. They want to feel heard. They want to feel understood. And so I think if we start to do more of that too, it will just create these connections and create this environment that is just better for everyone.
And we don't know what anybody's going through at any given time. I mean, the number of people from Harley who've since read my book and said, I had no idea that you were going through all this. And I'm not necessarily proud of that because I was just like, spit polishing my armor so that nobody knew what was going on. And I'm like, that is not a healthy way to lead, but I didn't feel like I was in, a culture that would support, and I didn't have models for supporting it. I think things have shifted quite significantly since those days. But yeah, I think those are places to start at the very least.
I love it. Okay, so if people want to find you, where do they find you?
Yeah, my two playground. Well, let me start with my website, shelleypaxton.com, and it's Shelley with an EY, and I'm sure you'll put the link in the notes. So that's like all the things. You can learn about me, my world, some of my favorite stuff. You can dig in, you can order the book from there. You can dive into my podcast from there, all the things. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm really dialing up my voice more on LinkedIn. So Shelley Paxton there. And I'm at Soulbbatical on Instagram.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll put all of this in the show notes. And it was just a true pleasure and treasure to have you today and get to know you a little bit more.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I can't wait to share book number 2 with you. So stay tuned.
Wow, such a cool story from Shelley. I mean, you can tell pivoting is scary. It's like building a muscle and it's hard. Part of Shelley's realization in her journey was asking herself over and over, what are you pretending not to know? Ask yourself that question today and see what gets in the way. I mean, we ask for advice from people because we're afraid to think about it ourselves. We tend to blame or deflect instead of facing the realities that we already know. Shelley explained how the risk to remain in a bud became bigger than the risk to blossom, and that's when change started to happen. Let yourself feel and take small steps, or follow the breadcrumbs, as Shelley mentioned, and see what happens. And then sometimes life events happen, like the story with her dad, that rock your world and make you come to a realization of what life is all about. Don't postpone joy. Write the script of your life that incorporates joy and positively impacting one soul each day. Do the Soul Sucks and Soul Fuels exercise today and see what gets your soul on fire, and do more of that. And if you follow Shelley on social media, you'll see she just released her Soulbbatical book in paperback. Go grab yourself a copy and get started today. Keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, It's simple and it works.